Our next session is called How is Technology Shaping Tomorrow's Marketer? A very interesting question. And to introduce the panel, I'd like to welcome back to the stage Michael Bayler. Michael, for those of you who haven't met him yet, is a strategist and author specializing in marketing transformation, and he's advised many of the world's leading brands, tech companies, and indeed media stars. Michael, over to you.
Right, like the sound, yeah, obviously. There's hardly any of us here, it'll change, but in the meantime, welcome to our session. This will probably be one of the more provocative sessions of the entire 2 days. Why? Because the temptation when we talk about marketing and technology is to dive straight into this obvious thing that marketing and tech are made for each other, and that we're in a world of data where data is the new oil, and so on. And I think we've had about 5 years of that now, so I'm hoping that we can actually use this session with the big thinkers and the big players that are involved in today's session to actually move the conversation forward, rather than just having the same conversation with different people again. So I think we're all ready. Is everybody ready to come up? I've got 3 fantastic panelists joining me. First of all, I'm not sure where he is, Chris May, who is the SVP and MD Europe and Emerging Markets for DataXu. Please give him a round of applause. And next, Claire Cronin, Customer and Marketing Director for Virgin Holidays. Claire, please give a round of applause. Thank you. And last but not least, my friend Steve Hyde, Chief Exec and Global Headhunter for 360 PMC. All right, now, to get the proceedings started, we have what I understand to be a deeply controversial slide that the guys from DataXu, who is our renowned researcher, and Chris is going to talk us through. Some of these numbers will shock you, some of them will confuse you, and we are going to use those numbers as a departure point for our lively little conversation. So, in your ears back and listen to what Chris has to say.
You will be relieved to know at this late juncture that I have only one slide. It's the slide behind me. I'm not going to make an inquiry as to if we have any CMOs in the room or how many we have. But seemingly, amongst the CMO community right now, there is an opinion that 9 out of 10 of them consider themselves to be doing a much better job from a digital perspective than their competitive peer set. Now, I'm not a mathematical analyst, but that gives me cause for mathematical concern. I can't see how we can have 90% of people doing better on average than everybody else. The stats that you see are some of the high-level numbers from a survey which we conducted in March and April of this year. And it was conducted to an audience, we had about 532 respondents. They were all senior marketers, decision makers with multi-million pound budgets and decision-making capabilities. There are some very interesting stats in here, and there are some interesting discrepancies between perception of various different positions within the organization. We make reference to CMT. When we make that reference, we're not talking specifically purely about marketing technology officer. We're talking about anybody who's been hired in the capacity of head of analytics, head of data, or head of marketing technology, for example. They all kind of fall into the same remit. And there's clearly some confusion between the traditional CMO roles and the opinion the CMO has as to what falls within his or her remit versus what falls into the remit of the CMT. So I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to come and sit down because I think you're far more ably adept to manage this than I. I shall hand over and let you pull the numbers apart.
I'll let you go that easily.
Okay.
So I will be back. I've been looking at these numbers for a couple of days, on and off, and I found them quite disturbing. And it spoke to me of misconception, it spoke to me of hubris amongst senior marketers about their position in marketing. It spoke to me of naivety, alarmingly, on the client side. And there also an enormous number of absolutely alarming truisms. 70% of marketers say creativity is becoming a more important skill. I mean, I would have expected 100% of marketers to say creativity is absolutely at the centre of what we do, and that may run across technology, it may run across media advertising, or it may run across events, or it may just be about better customer services, but creativity is absolutely core to what we do. I'm not going to question the validity or the depth of the research that you've done. You've spoken in depth to over 500 key people in the space.
Yeah.
And to be very frank with you, they sound a bit dumb. And I'm worried that they are in command of the fates of, not to mention customer experiences, one way or another, of some of the biggest brands in the world. But so I'm going to lay that down because there aren't that many business rooms, so we may as well stir things up a bit. But also because I have the luxury of asking Claire, what your thoughts are about this. You are known for being a tech-savvy, results-focused marketing lead who sits over a fairly well-integrated team across the tech data, customer experience, and also, of course, creative. Does this alarm you as much as it alarms me? Because I'm pretty sure it's not your experience in Virgin Holidays, but does it alarm you?
It does. I mean, I would like to say I wasn't one of the dumb marketers that responded in the survey, so...
No one here had anything to do with this. Just to be clear, I don't know who these people are.
No, nor me. It does surprise me, and I think the thing that surprised me most was that none of the marketers really flagged up that they found that talent was one of the biggest challenges in this area. Because I think actually, for most of the CMOs I know, the biggest challenges we have is finding the right depth of talent on the creative side and also on the technology side. So the fact that everybody feels they're doing a bang-up job across the board is somewhat surprising, and I think would be... I think their colleagues and their peers on the board would probably have a very different opinion. And certainly, I'm sure the technology officers would have a very different opinion.
Indeed. And of course, as per our conversation just now, there is this extraordinary, and it goes without saying, I'm not going to dwell on the subject, but there's this extraordinary split between the technology guys and the marketing guys and where they overlap, particularly in marketing. I did a bit of work a while ago looking into the fate of the chief marketing technology officer, the CMT, and it's not a pretty sight, really. They're very much thrown in as a messiah, very much appointed on quite a high salary by the board. And yet if you dig deeper into their capabilities, very few of them are actually qualified in any kind of engineering. I think about 15% of them actually have engineering qualifications. And most of them are people who've come out of brand marketing or advertising, done a bit of digital.
Yeah.
And suddenly they're cast into this extraordinary role, which, my phrase for that is coming to a crucifix near you. How long can you last? Steve, Claire mentioned talent. I know you have, from where you sit, you're probably closer to the sharp end in terms of seeing how this thinking reflects in client briefs to you, and also how once those briefs land, the fate of those candidates and how they actually play out on the client side. What are your thoughts on these numbers?
The numbers are scary if they're true, if they're a reality. I don't believe they are, because I don't believe it's possible to have a marketing capability in the sort of companies that we're talking about here that could perform with that kind of an approach and that kind of an attitude to change. The fact is that the marketeer has an holistic view across the communications piece and the speculation of the marketing budget for business growth. It's informed by many more different verticals than it used to be. It isn't just supply chain, packaging, distribution, advertising. It's fragmented, and data is helping inform many more of those verticals up to the point of the marketing director. I think that the CMO, I think the problem is that there's too much coming through, and the separatism has created insecurities in the relationships internally and externally, so with agency partners and with specialists within the client companies themselves. The more people you have, the more opportunity you have for a breakdown in communication and trust. And the fact is that data is being used as a crutch to inform and to rely on, rather than skill, intuition, capability, talent, which is at the heart of true decision-making. It needs to be informed decision-making with data, but people make the decisions. And experience, craft, will always out, should always out, and I don't think that will change. And I'll certainly, if we put a data specialist in, they're there to support a decision maker. They're not the decision maker. And I hope it remains that way.
Borrowing a term from American football, I suppose we can distinguish defensive use of data and offensive use of data.
Yeah.
I don't mean offensive.
Yeah.
I see a lot of defensive use of data.
Yeah.
And to my mind, this has actually led to the dearth of really great creative work that we're seeing with big brands at the moment.
But can I say, the most important player on the field is always going to be the quarterback, and that's the CMO. And they need to keep control of that position.
Is that quarterback in the enterprise right now?
I think they've moved over to the tight end, and they need to get back to doing their position at quarterback. Who are they? It is a problem because the CMO's role, and in many of the big companies you have a media expert. So whether they're called head of media communications or chief communications officer or whatever, their role has become fundamentally more important because their influence has become inherently important. Whether they are the same person or not remains to be seen. The point you made quite rightly is, if somebody is educated and trained as a marketeer, does that naturally make them a marketing technologist? That's not the skill set that they've been prepared for. I mean, some may be able to morph across, but you wouldn't naturally go looking to a marketeer to fulfill the role of marketing technologist if that is a genuine role. So I suspect within the larger companies, the person who has control of the media budget and the information that's coming in to inform that is probably better equipped than the marketeer, and is probably the right person relative to the marketeer, who should remain above all of that and ultimately make the big strategic decisions about the brand and the business.
Can I, super thinking, thank you, and can I draw a line under the pitching, which I think is very important, on what we call, what we people who spend time with the Jewish faith call fetching. Can we then move on and actually take a positive angle? And I'd like to know where everyone thinks the future impact of technology on marketing lies, and one of the interesting things that we're seeing coming down the pipe. This is obviously a bit of a bloodbath, you know, in terms of the reality going forward. However, those of us who sit a little bit closer to the edge, in a way, you two guys, I really like your thoughts on this, beyond programmatic, beyond the dreadful outgoing conversation, beyond what you might call the day-to-day digital business as usual uses of technology in marketing. What do you see coming down the pipe that you're excited about, and what are the challenges that you see in implementing that in this environment? Any thoughts on that at all? What are the new techs coming down, the new technology-enabled things that are coming that you're excited about?
This could get very tactical. It's you know, TV, hands down, is from our perspective as a technology firm, is a very exciting prospect just because of the scale, the scope, and the opportunity. And for the first time to kind of bring TV into the fold, if you like, of digital, where there's much more granularity and visibility onto the consumer experience, and we can tie it in with other channels. So there's that old chestnut that we can talk about, but it is an exciting chestnut nevertheless. And I think the analytics piece is the other piece, again, from a technology company perspective, one that it's probably worth mentioning in the spirit of transparency. We don't, as an organisation, get involved in media or data per se. That's not a commercial interest of ours. So the analytics side of the media mix is the other kind of exciting space, again, predominantly because channels like TV, digital and addressable out of home, as they become more commercially viable and they sort of come into that fold alongside all the age-old favourites that we know and love, the display, the video, the mobile, all that kind of stuff, it becomes a much more holistic experience. But I think, interestingly, the other comment that I'll make about, you know, the future of tech, where's it going, and forgive the rather odd analogy, but I bought a new car recently, and I'm a reasonably tech-savvy individual, and I got in this car, and without a shadow of a doubt, the car is significantly smarter than I am. And it's inconsistent in how it behaves because it requires input from me. The car can do almost anything. It can tell me where it is. I can start the air conditioning from here where the car's at home. You can do all these random things, but it requires me to learn an awful lot about how the car functions. And I was having a discussion with a colleague the other day about whether or not we're going to see from the motor industry a return back where it doesn't require me as an individual to have so much of a manual input to make the technology useful to me. Can the technology wrap itself around me so the technology itself becomes less of a focus, less of a consideration, and just gets on with the job that technology is good at doing in the background? And to your point earlier, it leaves marketeers to do the thing that marketeers are brilliant at, the skill set, which is the creativity element, the conceptual elements, the design elements, and kind of take, you know, the technology. Well, I don't need to understand how the engine in my car works. I just need to know that it's going to start when I turn the key.
There's a quote from Mark Weiser, you might have heard of, who was the CTO of Xerox PARC,
right,
who unfortunately died, I think, in the 90s. But in 1981, he predicted, really, they began focusing on what was becoming the Internet of Things, and they called it, I think, something like contextual computing or quantitative computing, and his quote was, the most important technologies are the ones that disappear.
Yes.
Which I always thought was totally inspiring. But at the same time, I have to pull back and say your metaphor about your struggle with your extremely clever car, is that a sort of an ill-concealed metaphor for the experience of the CMO with the suite of marketing technologies that are available to them now?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess as a technology company, I'm coming at it as a slightly different angle, and we were having a fantastic conversation earlier on about this idea of there's a concern that if we flood the marketeer with the responsibility to understand how the technology works and what the opportunities that it presents are, that we detract them from their ability to be able to work purely in the brand's interest from a creative perspective. So we then turn to, okay, so within the agency space, is it the agency's job then to become the expert and to be able to advise and guide their brand clients about the opportunities? And I sort of naively asked the question and said, is it that agencies are running too lean from a headcount perspective, so they don't have the capacity to be able to wrap their heads collectively around what the new technologies offer? Or are we back again at saying, well, actually, we do need a marketing technologist on the brand side, or a marketing technologist within the agency? Many agency groups, I suspect, would claim to already have some of these people. So it's an interesting question for me of acting in the best interest of the brand and being an expert there in the technology. Whose role should that be? Should that be somebody that's employed by the brand? Should it be somebody who's employed by the agency? And precisely what should their remit be?
I'm going to throw a little bit of that over to Claire.
Yeah,
because you've got quite a lot of experience in the space of integrating a team. I'd like to know where you're seeing encouraging streamlining effects and where you're seeing friction.
I mean, I think there's been a bit of a breakdown in trust, actually, between some of those relationships. So certainly between the marketing team to trust the technology team to really understand their specific needs and be able to pick the right solutions for them, because they're not close enough to the commercials of the business necessarily, or to the customer. And I think there's also sometimes a lack of trust with the agency as to some of the people that they're picking for some of these roles aren't necessarily any better than the people you can find internally to fill the roles yourself. So I think there's a bit of a breakdown in the relationships along the supply chain, which leads to quite a transactional relationship and leads to people wanting, therefore, to take control of the issue themselves and equip themselves in the right way. I mean, certainly I think there is a growing need to have more technology-minded people in marketing teams, and certainly I've appointed a marketing technology manager that sits in my team just to interface into our technology team, who can understand the requirements of the marketing team, who aren't always that great, actually, at being able to define their requirements, and then play those back to the technology team so they can act on our behalf. But we see that there's a need for the two functions to come much more closely together and to have that necessary friction, but without me stepping into the role of the technology officer, who ultimately should be architecting on behalf of the company.
You almost have a translator, don't you, in the guise of that person?
Steve, in your mind, and you may have touched on this already, forgive me if I missed it, but who is the best person in the enterprise to sit between the commercial and brand interests at the sharp end, at the customer end, if you like, and the technology specification and commitment end of the business? Who should be inputting into that process? Because it seems to be a really tough area. And are you seeing anything that indicates an answer to that?
I think there's a land grab going on by several parties all at the same time, because technology is providing data, and data is providing power. In too many client companies, the marketing director doesn't sit on the executive, and they report to the finance director, who effectively speaks on their behalf. The agencies are accountable to the CMO, but effectively they're accountable to the CFO, and they have no relationship with the CFO. So I think there's a land grab for influence with the data, because that brings with it power as part of the evolution towards hopefully a more collegiate and concentrated executive team that is made up of the client and of the suppliers. As to the individual, I think it'll be a transitionary. I don't think it's, I think that role will become more specialist, but I think initially it has to be something that a number of parties, including the agencies, are involved with. I think they have expertise, and they're probably better equipped currently to deal with it as it's evolving, but I think on the client side, and certainly some of the very big clients I work with, they already have those people, and I think a number indicated in this. Whether they have the power or whether they are there to inform I don't think has yet been decided. Personally, I think that they should be there to inform, and that the craft skills that have always existed should be maintained. The agencies have an opportunity with data to corroborate a lot of what they're doing, but they shouldn't do that because they feel weak in their relationship with the clients. They should do it because it provides meaningful insights that they then want to act upon, and strategy is defined by, and creativity is potentially informed by, but human instinct will still provide the colour.
Is this, I mean, there are, in every large global brand owner, there are people who sit in tech who face specific aspects of the business. They're basically divisionally focused technology people. And I wonder if this battle is as tricky in terms of facing other parts of the enterprise as it seems to be in marketing. Is it because the marketing tech thing has come up quite quickly on us, has emerged quite quickly on us, and we're still battling to make sense of it? Or are there deeper issues in terms of the way marketing, and there's always been a problem with marketing. You get very few marketing directors actually sit on the board. Or is this just another flavour of the same problem we've had for the last 50 years?
Can I just... I think part of the issue is that historically you had clients who had customers, and through advertising they talked at their customers, and if there was a retail experience then tried to talk with their customers, or at least gave them experience. Customers are now deeply embedded in the communication process because they've got control of it. They determine what they get, when they get it, how they get it, and whether they interact with it or feedback. So the customer experience and the advertising communication have become kind of one thing.
Yes.
And that's brought the agency disciplines in communication and the marketing disciplines a lot closer together. Marketers used to kind of own the customer relationship, and the agencies used to own the talking at the customers through the client.
Has it brought them together pragmatically, or has it brought them together theoretically?
I think it's crashed together areas of influence without having sorted out a framework to make it work effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And the experience I think of was always the Amazon experience, I always come back to, is there was a magic point where the communication from the brand, the product and the service kind of became the same thing. And when you engage with an Amazon, they're all melted together. And there's another melt that I think happens a lot as a result of digital, and I don't think it's challenged enough, which is the difference between marketing and advertising. We tend to assume now that they're the same thing. I think it's a terrible, sort of disastrous, melting thing. Expertise in marketing and expertise in advertising are entirely different, and indeed digital marketing and digital advertising are very, very different things. Do you feel, Claire, that the data, that the focus on the sort of endless chorus of focus on data-driven marketing, data-centered this, data is the new oil, do you feel that's appropriate in terms of the volume of that, the volume at the moment, or do you feel it's a little bit over-egged, perhaps?
We were just discussing this before we came on stage, actually, and I definitely think it's over-egged. I think there obviously has to be a focus on ROMI, and obviously data plays an incredibly important part in framing that discussion. But we've gotten to a place where we have very short annual reporting cycles, very much a focus on in-year income, and then that drives you to a very reductive place whereby you're constantly focusing on the short-term metrics that will deliver the results, and you're always in a place of justifying your existence and the reasons why you're trying to do things this year. And I think in order to make better advertising, better marketing, more creative decisions, you need to take a longer-term perspective. You also need to be prepared to fail on a number of things and not deliver return on investment on a portion of your marketing budget. And that takes a very evolved boardroom view where everybody buys into that, as opposed to sees it as a failure on the part of the marketing team and the CMO specifically for not delivering on their full 100% budget.
I think my personal opinion is that some of the biggest problems we face in marketing advertising right now is because the pendulum has swung too far towards data. And I'm not saying that data is a good or bad thing, but there is an assumption that the answers are in there somewhere. More and more I tend to look at data as being a question rather than the answer.
Absolutely, and I think it was most definitely exacerbated by the recession, because obviously as businesses started to suffer the effects of that and profits went down, then naturally the procurement departments, the finance departments actually started to ascend in their power at the boardroom table at the expense of the CMO. And I think we've yet to see a recalibration back to the CMO. I think it's starting to happen, and in some organisations it's happened certainly faster than others. I'm very fortunate I sit on the board, but in other organisations it is moving much more slowly back.
Does anyone see the marketing disappearing as a discipline, and the skills that are traditionally associated with marketing beginning to blend into product development and service development. We talked earlier on, and Steve mentioned about the fact that the communication of the product and service, if you like, the promise and the delivery, are now more or less the same thing. They certainly happen more or less concurrently, and the order in which they happen is also often reversed. I find myself wondering whether marketing as a discipline itself is almost a temporary thing. And I wonder whether the over-focus on data, by over-focusing on that, we're in danger of almost pushing ourselves into a corner. Any thoughts on that?
It's refreshing for me not to be the most controversial person on the stage. You're saying things that I don't have to. If I'm honest, and I think it's going to differ from vertical to vertical, so I would struggle to envisage a future where marketing as a defined discipline didn't exist to some extent separate from product development. I think, and incidentally, I speak as a very unqualified individual, not as a marketer, but I would stand by the fact that they are inherently very, very different skill sets, and they are different tasks at hand. So I don't think I can envisage a future where one doesn't exist. I can see a future where they are much more closely linked and work in much closer collaboration with each other. We see that across the client base that we have. We make a reference to something that we call the exhaust product. And the exhaust product is basically the return data feed from all of the activity that an advertiser runs. And if you look at clients like Ford Motor Company, and they've been doing this incidentally now, we've worked with them for 7 years, and for the last 3 years, they take the exhaust product in the form of customer insight and behaviours and feed it back into their product development team directly. There's also, Ford, for many failures, have also been quite forward-thinking in terms of utilisation of this resource that they have in many other departments within the organisation. It's not just the marketing department, or not even just the IT department. They've started to recognise that actually there's an enormous amount of value here. So what we're starting to see is maybe not all of these departments are working more closely together with each other, but they are certainly being impacted and benefiting from the activity. And to your point, those departments such as product and marketing are almost certainly coming closer together.
I suppose the question I'm really asking is not so much the death of marketing, but the integration of marketing.
Yeah.
And essentially, it has felt for so long like a rather isolated discipline, certainly at board level. Steve, in terms of talent going forward, where do you see, beyond this awful line that everyone has to learn to code, which I'm really sick of hearing, I suggest we don't talk about that. At a senior level, at a senior marketing level, how do you see talent requirements changing in the next, say, 2 to 3 years?
I think we're going to have to throw it out a bit further than that, actually. We can talk about change, but I think we've got to think about where the talent is going to come from over the next 3 to 4 years, because we've got to be talking to that talent now, because we may not recognise it today, but it may be exactly what we need 3 to 4 years from now. So we've got to start to explore the kind of characteristics and qualities and skills and backgrounds that may be the more contemporary marketeer, if they're called marketeers, of the future. I've got an interesting assignment at the moment. I can't name the company for obvious reasons because it's a pair of live briefs, but it's a very fresh thinking, quite a large organisation, multi-billion pound turnover. And there's an amazing CEO. They've brought in a game changer. Doesn't matter what their title is, but to me they're a game changer as a catalyst for change. And then the two most important individuals under that game changer is somebody who's not got a defined title, but their responsibility is everything to do with everything that touches the customer. And the other person is effectively a brand strategy and architecture director. So everything that is about the vision and everything that touches the customer. And they have complete responsibility and influence over everything. Now, I don't know where the CMO is supposed to sit in that, but it becomes one step further removed from the decision-making process. And I think,
the CMO is sitting in there somewhere.
But down the pipe, because those are absolutely newly defined roles in a company that has given up trying to undo stuff and has said, we draw a line and we start to think fresh about what we've got to have going forwards rather than what we've not got to have because we've had it. And I think you've got to do some of those ripping up the rule books and start fresh. The whole advertising industry is a car crash of a mess at the moment. And that's because we put layer on top of layer on top of layer on top of layer. The legacy of, Steve King was talking earlier, and I was with him when we set Zenith up on the first day. That was brilliant because it was fit for purpose at the time, but it's been layered on and layered on and layered. The infrastructure, the organic, it just doesn't, it's not right, it's not fit for purpose, it's got to shed a lot. And I think the companies that get the marketeer of the future will be the ones who are employing for the future rather than trying to compensate for the structures and the skill sets of the past. It's going to be painful, but I think it's going to be absolutely necessary.
So we leave you, those of you that are with really, I think, with a question on an answer, which is going forward in terms of this unhappy but still very promising, exciting interface between tech and marketing. What do we take forward and what do we leave behind? And hopefully when we sit down next time, we'll have a few more answers on that. But for now, I'd like to thank my esteemed panel, Chris, Claire and Steve. Please give them a round of applause.